Welcome to Fireside Giants. My name is Alex with my co-host here, Anthony Rivardo. And today we want to address some rumors that Jim Harbaugh, of course, the head coach of Michigan, could be making the transition back to the NFL and what that would mean for a team like the Giants, who might say, hey, experienced coach at the collegiate level, at the NFL level, maybe he's someone we want to consider a candidate if we are going to fire Joe Judge, which seemingly is becoming more and more probable by the day with all the stuff he continues to say. A lot of head coaches, former guys, he's thrown under the bus. I was just reading, Anthony, a quote from Twitter about Pat Shurmur. Apparently, Judge said that in 2019 during Shurmur's reign, everybody quit, everybody tapped, stopped showing up to captains' meetings. And Shurmur out here is like, I don't remember that. Obviously, that's not an accurate assessment, but beyond that, I have no comment. So I'm like, ooh, it's not really good that he's taking shots at former coaches. It's unnecessary, unwarranted. Focus on your team right now. Nobody gives a shit about 2019. We want to win now. We want to see progress now. Obviously, this team has fallen off a steep cliff. And unfortunately, we are sitting here talking about Dave Gettleman leaving probably within the next few days, and then Joe Judge potentially being out as well. And we all wanted him to be a long-term, solution for this team, Anthony. But now we're thinking, could Jim Harbaugh be a fit? Would he be a good option for this team? A lot of people on Twitter and social media are saying, yes, we want Jim Harbaugh, experienced, successful, and we want to take a look at some of his successes from the past, but also maybe why it might be not a great idea to go after him, Anthony. Before we do so, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing quite well, and I am really intrigued by the Jim Harbaugh rumors, right? I mean, even if he doesn't go to the New York Giants, just being a fan of the NFL, I find this super interesting. Jim Harbaugh has had a phenomenal career in the NFL and now has had a pretty good career as a collegiate coach as well at Michigan. He finally beat Ohio State this year. That was his big thing. He couldn't beat Ohio State. This year, he finally got the job done, and now after doing that, he feels accomplished. He might be ready to just go right back into the NFL after accomplishing that really elusive goal that he was chasing. So, Jim Harbaugh, you guys all remember him very well when the New York Giants went to the 2011-2012 Super Bowl 46. Who did the Giants beat in that conference championship game? Well, they beat the San Francisco 49ers with Jim Harbaugh as the head coach. And that was a really hard-fought game against a very good football team, a very well-coached football team that made it to the Super Bowl only 1 year after. They did lose, but that team, if I remember correctly, went to 4 straight NFC Conference Championship games. At the time that Jim Harbaugh decided to leave for Michigan, he was considered a top 5 head coach in the NFL, if I remember correctly. He was a premier coach in this league, and I believe if he returned to the league, he still would be a premier coach. John Harbaugh, people have a lot of criticisms about him recently, his brother, but he's also been one of the best coaches in the NFL for a very long time. The Harbaughs are smart football people, and Jim Harbaugh, no different from John, smart football person and a great coach. Great leader. I've watched plenty of videos of him recruiting people, speaking to his students at Michigan and his players at Michigan. They love him. He has a very great relationship with young players. I really like Jim Harbaugh. I do. If this becomes a true possibility for the New York Giants to consider moving on from Joe Judge for a guy like Jim Harbaugh, I think they absolutely do have to consider it. And I'm excited to discuss it with you, Alex, and talk about why this might be a must-have option for the New York Giants.
Right, and there's a lot of things to like about Jim Harbaugh. As you said before, he is it comes from a football family and a really successful one at that. You look at John over in Baltimore, you see a lot of good teams, a lot of good players that they've managed to get. And then, of course, you have guys like Aiden Hutchinson coming from Michigan, and he's really helped develop some of these phenomenal players, Rashawn Gary. There's so many great guys. But ultimately, like going back to the NFL, it is a different beast entirely. Some say being a college head coach is even more difficult than an NFL head coach because the practices are more gruesome. There's the recruiting portion of it is absolutely off the charts and off the walls. There's no like general manager type of thing. So it's a really interesting dynamic, comparing both. But he's had success in both areas, right? When he was with the 49ers in the NFL, he was awesome, right? He had 4 seasons with the San Francisco 49ers. They were in the playoffs, I think 3 of those years. NFC champions, one of them. He made it to a Super Bowl. I mean, for goodness sake, the guy helped Alex Smith get to the championship game. The guy helped Colin Kaepernick get to a Super Bowl. He knows how to run a team. Now, he's also had a couple of run-ins with players in the past, notably Richard Sherman. That's one that really stands out during his days at Stanford, way back when. But of course, like that's old news. I don't think, Richard Sherman, and Richard Sherman, for the record, has come into fuse with a lot of different people. It's not just Jim Harbaugh. He was most recently seen, and I think it was a mental issue or something. But he was mostly seen drunk out of his mind, banging on his wife's or girlfriend's door or something like that. It was crazy. So he definitely has his own demons that he's working through, but he's kind of bounced back and become a really nice figure for this Buccaneers team. But, the feud between Jim Harbaugh, Richard Sherman, he's had other feuds before with other players, but ultimately I think Jim Harbaugh is still, well regarded in the NFL. I wouldn't say he's on any bad sides. You're not going to see him and Richard Sherman teaming up anytime soon, but ultimately that's, Sherman's at the end of his career nonetheless. But back in the day, Richard Sherman was a wide receiver at Stanford, and that's where Jim Harbaugh started his collegiate career, and he wanted to transfer. He actually wanted Richard Sherman to transfer because he claimed that he quit on the team. Later on, ends up being an NFL star, obviously at cornerback, and reunites with him in San Francisco. So really interesting, how the world takes you, how life takes you through things. At one point, Richard Sherman said on Harbaugh, I wanted to put him out of the league. And once I got that done, I had no animosity toward the 49ers organization. So, there's definitely some beef there. I don't really know what it was. Could be old stuff, new stuff. Who knows? But ultimately, when you're looking at Jim Harbaugh's record, the first 3 seasons, he's 48, 49, 50, 51 during those seasons. He's a little bit older now. I'm probably headed really close to 60 at this point. He was 13-3 in his first season, 11-4-1, and then 12-4, and then 8-8. He was tremendously successful with the 49ers, and everybody knows the 49ers were a garbage organization before he got there. Of course, in the past, they were phenomenal, but they were really going through a tough time. They were really at the bottom of the league, and now they've risen to ascension with Kyle Shanahan and become once again a really established and well-regarded franchise. And I think that when you're looking at Jim Harbaugh, he kind of put those wheels in motion for Kyle Shanahan to eventually take over. So, Anthony, when you're looking at Jim Harbaugh, how much stock do you put in these feuds he's had with former players? Is that something that concerns you or worries you? Or you're like, no, you know what? I don't really give a shit about that. Fresh start in the NFL. Let him come. He should be at the top of the list.
No, I really don't know too much about any of the feuds. That's never been a main talking point for me with Jim Harbaugh. What's always been a main talking point for me with his college career has been how much the players gravitate towards him. That's not feuds. That's love. I've seen players. I saw a video a couple years ago when he had rumors of maybe returning back to the NFL, and he called personally all of his recruits and told them, don't read into any of these rumors. Don't buy into any of this. I'm staying here. I chose you to be on this team. I want to coach you. He's like a leader. I always view Jim Harbaugh as a great leader, especially with young men, the college students. And, the Giants are a pretty young roster. The core, the foundation of this team is Avery McKinney, Andrew Thomas. If you want to say Daniel Jones, sure, Kadarius Toney. Those are young players. These are young men. And I like the idea of a team with so many young players, young talented players, to go ahead and get a head coach from college that knows how to coach young players, but he also knows how to coach older players. He's a 60-year-old man, Jim Harbaugh. He's 58, and he's coached in the NFL before. He's made it all the way to the Super Bowl before. Granted, he didn't win the Super Bowl, but he can get the team to the Super Bowl, and once you get there, anything can happen. That's how it goes, and that team did fight hard in that Super Bowl as well. That's the game where the lights went out and the 49ers came back. It came down to basically a no-call on pass interference at the final play of the game, so it was a hell of a game, well fought. Jim Harbaugh coached his team all the way there. Feuds with other players. Listen, Richard Sherman, I don't want to speak too much about his off-the-field stuff, but on the field, he's always been known to be one of the biggest trash talkers. He was a huge trash talker with Michael Crabtree. What I remember in the San Francisco 49ers versus Seahawks rivalry with Richard Sherman, the feud that he had was mostly with Michael Crabtree, if I remember correctly. Michael Crabtree and him. We all remember Crabtree. I'm one of the best corners in the game. Don't test me with a sorry receiver like Crabtree, right? That's like the super famous quote. I used to say that quote like word for word. I used to know it because it was just one of the most awesome moments in NFL history at the time. And Richard Sherman has had beefs with people. Jim Harbaugh, if you're saying he's had beefs with people, okay, but he's also had a tremendous record and track record of leading men. He is a leader amongst men, and he's been a phenomenal head coach for the Wolverines. The Wolverines, they could have fired him at some point. Michigan could have fired him for not being able to beat Ohio State, but he stuck around. He fought hard. He earned his right to stay as the head coach of that team, and they finally beat Ohio State. They did it. Jim Harbaugh, he always knew that they would do it, and he finally did it. I always have viewed him as a great leader, like I said. And go ahead, search those videos of him speaking to his college recruits. You'll find them. He's well-spoken. He shows really great compassion and love towards these college students that he coaches. I just think he's a phenomenal leader, and I don't put any stock into any of any beef that he had with Richard Sherman in the past or whatever. And another thing that I do want to bring up is keep in mind, many Giants fans have been wanting an offensive-minded head coach, right? Someone who knows offense, can fix this horrible offense that the Giants had. Well, Jim Harbaugh is a former Pro Bowl quarterback in the NFL with the Indianapolis Colts in 1995. Then he started off his career as a coach with the Oakland Raiders in 2002 to 2003 as a quarterbacks coach. He was there for 2 years, and then he instantly went to San Diego as a head coach. He was a quarterbacks coach for 2 years and became a head coach for 2 years right after that with San Diego. So he is an offensive-minded guy. He knows how to coach quarterbacks. He was a quarterback. He knows what it takes to have good offensive success, and he's been an offensive-minded head coach for the entirety of his career, and he's had some really high-powered offenses on his team and also some great defenses with the San Francisco 49ers. Does everybody remember how freaking amazing that defense was in the early 2010s? And that wasn't just Jim Harbaugh, though, and this is where things get really interesting. Vic Fangio, head coach of the Denver Broncos, he's on the bubble. Some are saying that he could get fired from the Denver Broncos. They might go in a new direction. Well, if that happens, he's the leading candidate to be the defensive coordinator for wherever Jim Harbaugh decides to go if he decides to make the move to the NFL. So if you bring that up as well into this conversation and you look at that, you could get Jim Harbaugh packaged with Vic Fangio, who's had some of the best defenses in the NFL in recent time. I mean, you're talking about maybe building one of the best coaching staffs, one of the most credible coaching staffs, because I understand the Giants built a large coaching staff this past year, but they didn't build a credible one necessarily. Jim Harbaugh is a credible head coach, a proven good head coach. Vic Fangio is a proven defensive mastermind. The Giants, if they see this as an opportunity, they need to seize it because this really could be that credible, credential, strong coaching staff that they've been looking for to right this ship and get the fan base back on board with a real head coach, not a guy who talks like a head coach, but a real proven head coach in Jim Harbaugh. I love this idea. I don't know how realistic it is. I still don't think the Giants have the cojones to fire Joe Judge and move on, but if they do, I think that Jim Harbaugh is going to be the number one head coaching candidate on my list.
Right. And, there's one thing that did, there's another player that did come out and say something that was interesting. Randy Moss, last season in the NFL, 2012, he joins the San Francisco 49ers to help them. And he says he treated us like men. He treated us men like we were still college kids at Stanford. So that was something he said, but hell, man, I don't give a shit how you treat these guys if they're winning football games, because ultimately the fans want to see wins. You know what I mean? If you're treating them like college kids, but they're winning football games, I don't see the problem. You know what I mean? Like, of course they deserve to be respected. The players deserve to be respected. Like that's 100%. I don't really know the context or like what Randy Moss was talking about specifically. But ultimately, maybe, he was always kind of like very, very arrogant and outgoing. And, Randy Moss wanted the attention. Maybe he didn't get that from Jim Harbaugh, but ultimately, I think that team was winning. They made a Super Bowl. They made multiple. They made multiple conference championships. Ultimately, I think it comes down to winning football. And when you're winning football, and I forget who said this. Was it Judge? I don't remember who said it. Winning cures everything. Maybe it was a media hat. I forget who said that recently, but somebody said winning cures everything.
That's a famous quote. I've heard that from a lot of people, to be fair.
Of course. And it's true. It's true. Have you ever played a sport? If you've ever played a sport, and look at the Lions, for goodness sake. Look at the Lions. They're one of the worst teams in the league, but they are 100% behind their coach. That team fights tooth and nail every single week. I'd rather be the Detroit Lions than the Giants right now, and that is something I never thought I'd say in my lifetime, ever. The Detroit Lions don't give a shit that they suck. They love their head coach. They've bought in. They trust the process. And they fight, man. They got some good players. Amon-Ra St. Brown with a backup quarterback last week, 2 touchdowns, won me my fantasy final. That guy's a stud. And you look at the schemes developing, you can see growth. You can see it on the field because they might be losing at the end of games. They might blow a couple here and there, but they're a team on the ascension. The Giants are on the team on the regression. They're on the downturn. And I think that's why you look at a bad team, but you say, you know what? I trust those guys. I have faith in that. I think the Lions are going somewhere. You look at the Giants, they're just as bad as Detroit, but they're not even in games. They're losing games by double-digit points. Their opposing quarterbacks are being benched because they're so far ahead. Garbage time touchdown. The Giants have scored 1 touchdown in the last 3 weeks, 35 consecutive drives. They've scored 1 touchdown in all of those. So, when you're looking at this team, Jim Harbaugh maybe comes in here, has some some more gusto, has some professionalism, has some experience. He has that direct pipeline of players from college, right? And Judge has the pipeline from Alabama. He has the connections. But I'll tell you what, I guarantee you Harbaugh has just as good connections as Joe Judge, if not better, because he understands, the college level at such a high level
Much
right now, and
better.
he can just pipeline those Michigan players, man. And they have some good guys. They have some good, talented players there,
Aiden
and not just
Hutchinson?
Michigan. Aiden Hutchinson, and maybe not even just Michigan players, other teams as well. He has a firsthand experience playing Ohio State, playing these big schools and smaller schools, and he knows so much. Like, that might be a big benefit of hiring Jim Harbaugh, and all the connections and all the coaches he now has spread across the NFL and football verse. So that could be a positive as well. I do like the concept of bringing in Harbaugh. The players saying stuff about him in the past definitely is a red flag, but every head coaching candidate, every candidate you can possibly muster is going to have red flags. All of them. A lot of people might say Eric Bieniemy, and I like Eric Bieniemy, but he's also had a couple of really bad stuff. Wasn't he just caught with like a DUI last year or something like that, or some crazy shit? Like, everybody has red flags no matter what it is. So ultimately, you have to weigh the pros and cons. I think Jim Harbaugh's pros are just astronomically better than most of the candidates that will be available for us.
Yeah, and I want to segue into another kind of off the field thing with Jim Harbaugh. I found this story online that is just so freaking awesome and actually really funny, so I want to share it with everybody. Jim Harbaugh, so this is related to Urban Meyer. Now, we all remember early on this season, Urban Meyer, the Jaguars lost the game, and what did he do? He didn't fly home with them. Instead, he hung out in a bar with some college student, and we know exactly what he was doing over there, right? So apparently, there was a similar situation that happened with Jim Harbaugh, and that sounds bad at first, but he handled it completely differently from how Urban Meyer handled it, and this is where things get really great. The answer, yes. In fact, one has to look no further than Meyer's longtime rival, Michigan football head coach Jim Harbaugh. Compare with a Jim Harbaugh college story I heard about. A female student started flirting with him at a party. He asked if she wanted to play catch, and then he proceeded to take it super seriously, made her run routes, fired bullets, etc., until she got bored and left. And then there's like a more detailed version of the story. He said to the first girl, "Keep your hands up, thumbs down," and he showed her the proper motion with his hands. He started firing bullets at her. Thunk. It hit the girl in the shoulder and knocked her down. Jim wasn't playing. This is just so awesome. This is actually one of the funniest stories that I've ever seen. I love Jim Harbaugh, guys. I don't know. I've been saying it this whole video, or this whole episode. I really love Jim Harbaugh. I think that he is a great leader. I'm not worried about, controversies that he's had with certain players. That's going to happen. But look at Joe Judge, the controversy that he just sparked with an entire fan base, with 3 fan bases, with the Broncos fan base, our fan base, and the Washington football team's fan base, because he just went on an 11-minute rant calling out former players of this team, former coaches of the team, and the Washington football team fighting on the sidelines. I mean, if you want to talk about off-the-field controversies, that's almost more controversial than anything Jim Harbaugh has ever done. So I'm not worried about it, man. I think that Jim Harbaugh is a phenomenal head coach, would be the top candidate if these rumors are true, and if he is interested in the New York Giants, because that's huge too. And also, Alex, as you mentioned, the connections that he has. Yes, many connections to Michigan football players, but also, like I said, Vic Fangio. That is a huge connection. That would literally give the Giants the opportunity. If Jim Harbaugh doesn't want to keep Patrick Graham in place, he can go after Vic Fangio, and that would literally be arguably the top defensive coordinator candidate in the NFL. The Giants really have an opportunity here. If this is true, if these rumors are true, they should strongly consider going after Jim Harbaugh, because every time he's on the open head coaching market, he's the number one name to get. He is the top candidate every single time, and there is a reason for that. So the Giants really need to start considering this, because, man, I swear, this would be the thing that really just brings a fan base together, gets everyone on the same page, and gets them loving the New York Giants once again.
Absolutely, but I want to hear your guys' opinions down below on YouTube. Please leave us a like and a comment, as always, and subscription if you are new to the channel. Really interested to hear your thoughts on Jim Harbaugh, if you think he'd be a great option for this team. Of course, I think we've come to the conclusion that we would totally consider him as a candidate. Am I going to say that he's the perfect candidate? No. But would I consider him as one, and the Giants should pursue him and see if he's the right fit? Absolutely. What's the harm? There's a ton of great guys out there. Eric Bieniemy being one, despite his shortcomings in recent years. I still think that he has had tremendous experience learning behind Andy Reid and learning how to operate a team that's a Super Bowl quality team year in and year out. Of course, Patrick Mahomes helps a lot. But I will say, He knows what to look for in talent, and it seems like the Chiefs really focus on speed and athleticism as their primary thing, which is something that goes back to Ed Dodds. I wonder if Ed Dodds and Eric Bieniemy would be a good pairing, because it seems like the Chiefs love speed, athleticism, and Ed Dodds loves speed and athleticism. Maybe that ethos would be a nice connection between those two. Something that we can consider in the past. We'll talk about that as a potential duo in the coming weeks. Of course, once we find out what happens with Judge and whatnot. But I'm excited to hear your thoughts on Jim Harbaugh. Make sure to like and subscribe. We'll catch you guys on the next Fireside Giants episode.